And what we can do then is we can split this up into a 2x2, right? So as a B school professor, right, we're habitually required to create 2x2s. So this is my contribution. And what we have here is, on the one side, the solution generation knowledge perspective. And the idea is the knowledge about generating solutions, is that highly concentrated or is that distributed, right? And then also, is knowledge about which solutions to pick, right? Is that highly concentrated or is it distributed? So let's think about NASA. NASA has very concentrated knowledge about what happens in microgravity, right? They have access to this knowledge that many other people don't have, right? So your average scientist at a university won't be able to simulate sort of micro G or zero G in any kind of a nice way. So problems that tend to have a lot of micro G implications, you may say, well, NASA is the right place for us to do it. We should do it all internally to NASA, right? And similarly, if a micro G solution showed up, right, from somewhere else, right, probably the folks within NASA would have the right, be able to select the right solution as well, be able to assess it and sort of say, is this the right solution or not? And so you would say, well, then that means that NASA, should be sort of focused here. But in fact, there are many other problems that NASA faces that don't have a micro G requirement. Micro G does come in later, but in many cases, there are problems that probably have lots of solutions on the outside, and many different perspectives can be provided. So then you would say, well, let's just be more on this side. Let's invite many people to submit designs. And then there may be settings where, in fact, even how to select the right answer may also be better off by letting more people participate in the selection process. And what this does for us is that it allows us to basically sort of put ourselves into various quadrants. So when you think that both the knowledge to generate solutions and the knowledge to select solutions is concentrated, you'd go to an internally managed process, okay? When you think that the solution knowledge is distributed, where many people may have distributed knowledge about how to solve the problem, we might go to a tournament setting, like a top coder, like an incentive, but we would ourselves select it, right? An internal team would select the right answer because we have the right basis. If we think that both the knowledge is widely distributed and the use knowledge is widely distributed, we may go to a community model where basically we're relying on the community to generate all the ideas, but then also to select the best ideas, and we come through. And threadless and many of the open source settings tend to be in this sort of a domain. If the use knowledge is concentrated, if the use knowledge is distributed, but the solution knowledge is concentrated, you might go to a market mechanism instead. So this helps us think about which form of external innovation we want to use, depending upon where we think the knowledge domain is. Now, the bias in most settings is everything is here, right? We're so special, we're so unique, right? You talk to any company, they go, no, our problems are so unique that nobody else can do this. Right? I talk to my colleagues in the medical school, they go, no, you don't understand. We are so specialized that nobody else would have any take on this problem. But as soon as you sort of engage in a problem definition process, as soon as you sort of engage in an abstraction process, what you find is that oftentimes we can rely on the other domains to help us think through for both the solutions as well as the selection. And then this is an eye chart, but basically there are some key challenges for firms to use this perspective, right? Again, not an easy thing to do. Many people think, crowdsourcing is this magic pixie dust that you throw on a company and all of a sudden great solutions will arrive for free. And I'm like, no. If that's what you think your answer is, don't even do it. Because this requires as much work, perhaps even more work because it's so new, than internal innovation efforts. The payoff is that you'll get better solutions at the end for a dollar invested, but it's still really hard work. And there's issues about how you align your internal organization, how you define the problem, how you choose the right platform, how you filter the submission, how you incorporate the ideas into your own systems, and then how you build a sustainable model. All of these are doctoral dissertations that you can imagine people spending lots of time trying to figure that out. And that's all I have. So do we have time for questions or? Okay, great. So Jeff, anybody questions? I have some mics around. Yes?
Are you going to put this on our website?
Maybe, yes, of course.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
guess all.
I should announce, all the videos will be on the website, and we'll ask each presenter if, this is being videotaped, we'll ask each presenter if it's okay to post the slides so you'd have access to all the material.
Yes, ma'am. 2x2? Yes.
Karim, can you restate the question if they don't
Sure.
have a mic?
Oh, yes, sure. So the question was just explain what this, I went through this quite fast. What does it mean to be invited, to be managed, to be selected and elected, right? Those are the dimensions you want to understand. So basically, what we're saying is that when we are doing an internal innovation process, when you sort of think about the vertical axis of solution knowledge, if you're doing it internally, you are actively managing the process. Right? You will select the teams, you will define the problem, you will create incentives, you'll create milestones, you'll do a whole range of activities to manage the process when you're doing it internally. When you go to the external process, from a solution generation perspective, you're basically putting out a broad invitation to the world to participate. Right? The world will say, interesting problem, I think an approach is X. Nah, I think an approach is Y, I think an approach is Z. You don't have an activist management role in the generation of the ideas. Somebody else does it themselves, right? Or other company does it themselves. Okay? So that's what it means in terms of how heavy you're managing. And then in this case, when we think about how you make a decision about which ones to pick, the selected domain says that the firm again plays an activist role of selecting the right design, selecting the right solution out of multiple ones that are generated. And in the elected world, what you're saying is that we will let other people help give us signals to see which the best ideas are. So I recently ran an experiment using ERA funding from the NIH and colleagues at the medical school, where we asked a question about, we needed new research hypotheses for type 1 diabetes. So we weren't asking for solutions, we were asking for new questions. And we did that on the NSNF platform. We received about 150 great ideas. And then we went through this approach where we created 9 cohorts of reviewers, ranging from sort of a type RO1 NIH researcher to a clinician. And we asked them to rate these ideas to help us select them. And what we discovered actually was that there was no concurrence amongst the different cohorts. Right? And so what the RO1 researcher valued as being really important was very different from what the clinician valued as being very important. And so even then you're faced with a bias when you are looking at ideas and which ideas you're going to fund and not fund. Each of our evaluations, each of our submissions got on average 24 independent evaluations. And then we couldn't get them to converge to any one best idea. So question... Barbara.
Yeah, Karim, I think I hear you saying 2 different things. One is that more solutions in an almost stochastic way is going to increase the likelihood that you're going to get the extreme solution that you want.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, that if you manage the amount of uncertainty in the statement of the problem, you can generate both the incentive to compete and the higher likelihood that you're going to get the answer that you want, which is, in a sense, not so stochastic. And it sounds to me as if you're aiming not for a population statistics approach, in a sense, but really trying to pull out of a whole population of solvers the ones who are going to be most attracted by the kind of question you're posing and the most capable of answering it with the kind of complexity that you want.
Absolutely. So I mean, I think this trade-off is at the heart of tournaments. So tournaments are based on an order statistic perspective, right? We just want, as you generate more and more people participating, the likelihood of you just getting an extreme value goes high. I mean, that's a given. We see that statistically, we can show that statistically come through. But the order statistics perspective does not account for strategic interaction, which is like, if I see Barbara is there, I'm not going to show up. Like, come on, she's going to kick my butt, right? And so I'm going to not participate. And so we have to really think about how we manage the process, and we have to become sophisticated about that. What we see when we did the analysis of these 9,000 problems on Topcoder, there was a quasi-experimental setting for us. What we observed was that this incentive effect of more competition, I'm not going to work as hard, is mitigated around more uncertain problems. And so as we try to sort of apply tournaments as a universal solvent to all our problems, right? From the highly uncertain to highly simple, we just need to be careful about how we think about that. That for at least the problems that have been posted on Innocentive or other platforms, what we've seen is that they tend to be by nature highly uncertain problems. But as you pick more simpler problems, we may want to be thinking smarter about how we think about entry and exit for people.
I mean, it sounds to me like this is a real efficiency issue, because if you get 10 applications or 10 solutions, it's not so hard to figure out which is the right one or the best one. If you get 10 million,
yes,
then finding the needle in the haystack becomes a huge amount of work just by itself. And
absolutely. So, and that's often the case where you'll get hundreds of submissions. I mean, I think the NASA experience was for the exercise device challenge, they got 60 submissions. It was pretty hard for them to filter through it. And so that becomes equally an important issue. And then we need to sort of think about, again, the two dimensions here is that even then the selection knowledge, then you want to sort of think about how do you invite more people to help you select. Because we know, at least from our data, that there's a tremendous bias in the various people that are evaluating by their cohort.
Do you have data on the sustained advantage for the application of these? But one thing is to design the challenges.
Yes.
And then you step back and you look at the sustained application of these approaches longer term. Do you have sufficient data around that yet?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we're still, I think probably the folks on the platforms will have a better way to answer that for you. My sense is that there's a pretty steep curve for many organizations to be able to bring this in as a systematic use of in their R&D arsenal. Oftentimes what you see is that they'll do it once or twice or 3 times or 10 times, and then the R&D VP moves on, something else goes on, and everybody sets back to normal, right? And because this is again highly counterintuitive for us as we sort of think about what needs to be done here. My sense is that those organizations like a P&G, like a Syngenta, those that have sort of committed to this, or like a General Mills, those organizations that have sort of figured out a way to bring this in and make it part of their routine practice are doing really well with it. But oftentimes they're very secretive about their data, and they don't want to share it because to them it's like a competitive advantage that they have found. So it's hard for us to get that kind of analysis. But I'm sure in the panel we'll be able to interrogate the platform folks and see what they say.
Is there data on the interaction between domain and then the potential success of distributed innovation?
In what? I don't understand your question.
Well, you might imagine that some domains are less sort of supportive of say, a distributed
Oh, I
request
see,
than
I see.
others, right? That there's a distribution of the impact of this kind of application to domains,
Yes,
right?
yes, that's a great question. No systematic evidence about that question about which domains can this be applied to. We know for sure some domains are more amenable to this. If you think about the world of software, why has the software world done so well with open source and also with tournaments? It's because software is ultimately fungible. Anybody with a computer can write software. We can then also test it and share it and assess it rapidly. So in the world of software, it's great. We're doing amazing things with it, and in ways that we never anticipated. As more and more of the world becomes digitized and becomes information-based, we can imagine these perspectives also taking hold. So for instance, biology is now as much a wet science as is information science. And if we can sort of extract the information component of biology and run it as software, then we may be able to directly apply these perspectives. There's a second question in here, which is, I really think that the nature of the problem, to some degree, impacts how solvable it is in these settings. But what that nature is, we haven't been able to crack yet. And we're trying to build research about how do we sort of get at the problem definition phase. And my doctoral student, Hila, is here, and she's actually spending lots of time with NASA to understand how problems get defined for challenges, because we think that's a pretty important question for us.
And I'd just like to point out, I forgot one thing. If you'd identify yourself and where you're from, when you ask the question, it's going to help people recognize each other here throughout the day, if you would. Thanks.
Hi, Rolf Müller, founder of Biometrica. I just have a question. If you use this kind of approach, how do you actually organize ownership, intellectual property, revenue sharing, downstream revenue sharing? So how do you manage that? That must be a very complicated process if you cobble together, if all of a sudden you have to deal with perhaps 50 innovators and who receives which kind of compensation?
Yeah, all of the above. So what we see are different schemes. Different organizations do it in different ways. Some arrangements are that there's a straight intellectual property transfer. If you win the prize, the IP transfers. In other settings, the organization says that you win, you get a prize, and then you also get some royalty for its use. In other cases, it's like we'll just shake your hand, thank you for a great idea, and that's it. Because these systems are based on self-selection, right? Nobody puts a gun to anybody's head to submit. The sponsor can dictate the rules. The sponsor can say, you must transfer IP, right? If you get the award, and if you sign in and you submit, right? You're contractually bound to those things. I think the incidences of IP transfer in many of these platforms has been very high. So there have been very few cases where the IP got stuck. In most settings, because of the self-selection mechanism, you set the contracts, and then you just hopefully you've got smart lawyers that will participate with you and create the right contracts. But also there is an element of fairness that you can't expect to gouge these innovators, because then they'll be just a one-time game and they'll never show up. So for instance, I believe Pepsi in the recipe contest are actually offering for the winning recipes like a percentage of sales to the winner. So they ran a challenge in India. I think it was like 0.5% of the sales you would get as a revenue stream. That's a lot of money in India, right? I mean, in the sense of a big market, lots of volume, and so on. So yeah, and I think it's really a question of who you want to attract, and what do you think is going to attract people to participate with you.
Other questions? We have a couple more minutes for questions.
I got a question. Hi, Chris Fall, Office of Naval Research. I wonder if you can offer any insight into self-organization amongst the solvers.
Yes. I think Pascal will probably do a better job when he talks about open source. What we do see is that there's a big demand. One of the things that happens is when you build these platforms, a community emerges. People say, I'm participating in the platform, I want to talk to you, I want to talk to somebody else. And then oftentimes they want to then work together to create solutions as well. The IP rules have often blocked this perspective, because you can imagine a lawyer just freaking out, sort of saying, how will we assign IP rights if a collaborative has done this thing? But there is a demand for it. I'm in the middle of running a bunch of field experiments right now to understand how does the self-organization work versus if you were to sort of design the best team. But I think the best evidence of that is from open source, where we see that happen all the time. There is a bit of a management aspect to self-organizing that I think Pascal will also talk about, but these two things are related. The one direct connection is the self-selection, where the person with the answer matches themselves to the problem, right? So in most settings, what we do is that the problem holder searches for the solution, looks for the answer, right? So you have the problem, and then you look around, you do a search for the solution. In the tournaments, it's the other way around, right? Somebody with the answer is looking for the problem to match themselves onto. And this is one little bit of it. Yes.
I have another question. This is Mary Kaiser.
What's your name, please?
Yeah, Mary Kaiser from NASA Ames.
Okay.
I'd like to ask about losers.
Great.
Two questions. One is kind of the fatigue factor.
Yeah.
That if you've tried several times without success, what motivates you to come back? The other is to enlarge on the gentleman's IT question. If you have an entry that wasn't selected, but then later the company comes up with something that resembles what someone suggested and they claim, well, I made that suggestion and was
Yes.
never compensated.
Right. So indeed, if you think about this, right, when we're looking at this distribution, right, this is the winner here, everybody else is lost, right? So innovation tournaments are more about the losers than about the winners, right? Most people, 99% of the people are losing, and 1% are winning. And the question is, why are they doing this? Why are they participating? What's driving their participation? Well, what we find when we ask them, when we've done surveys of motivations, is that the motivations appear to be actually very similar to the open source motivations. They're in it for the enjoyment. They're in it for the intellectual curiosity. They're in it for the learning. They're in it. The best platforms actually have communities that after the problem got solved, they will talk to each other and sort of say, well, how did you come up with the best solution? What was the best solution? And so they can learn. So that's why even in these tournaments, you have to pay attention to the communities that you're attracting and the ways you engage with them. For instance, GE recently ran this Eco-Imagination Challenge. In a space of 10 weeks, they had 70,000 people sign up, and they received 3,000 ideas on various green things. GE gave away like 24 awards or something like that.